good place now. You are listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I'm asking you, are you currently being manipulated by someone in a relationship, at work, or a friend? And are you beginning to feel resentment, anger, confusion? You know, most of the time when we're being manipulated, we don't really realize it's happening. We don't really know where to put our finger on the pulse at. We just know that we're not feeling right. We feel worried. We feel dejected. We even might feel kind of just angry because we find ourselves doing things or being in positions that we really don't want to be in. And we realize that we got there because we agreed to somebody to do something, or somebody asked us to do something, or we bent over backwards to help somebody. But it feels really, unrequited. And it feels as though none of this is really going in the direction for the good of us. And I'm not saying that we're all looking at what's in it for me. But I do think that sometimes when we are being manipulated, more often than not, we feel that something's amiss. We feel that something's off because we don't feel good about the choices we're making. We don't feel good about what we're finding ourselves in. And we feel like we're under somebody's thumb. On the show, I'm going to be talking about manipulation. You know, some signs that you are being manipulated. And some of them might not cover what you're dealing with, but you'll be able to inherently extract what's happening in these signs and be able to see if it's happening in your day-to-day life. You remember, awareness is key. You know, knowledge is power. And so if we can really focus on understanding the feelings, right, and the general idea and what it means to be manipulated, you have the tools and the strategies to avoid that manipulation, stand up for yourself, and decide if you're ready to let go of this type of relationship. You know, I found that more often than not, they're cyclical, right? Like when we were kids and we were being raised, maybe one of the parents was more manipulative and controlling than the other. Maybe one of them was always, argumentative or angry, or you felt as though you were always jumping through hoops. You know, many of you out there, in order to get praise and conditional love from the folks that raised you, you had to do something awesome. Like you had to win the game, or you had to whatever. There was something you had to do, and you had to make it happen. And if you did, you were the hero. And if you weren't, you got the silent treatment. And it's interesting when I talk to clients, when I'm in therapy sessions, or even when we're working on coaching sessions and we're past the therapy, this manipulation still comes up. Because what happens is that we go through these different cycles as we're growing up, and we experience these different forms of manipulation, and we basically house those in the hard drive that's our mind. And they could be conscious or in our subconscious, right? Because most of the stuff is in our subconscious. We're not like thinking it. Because in order for it to be like in our conscious thought, it's got to be right there. It's got to be like, if you're looking at your computer and you have the desktop, right? The desktop is whatever's open. The apps that are open right now on your desktop, that's to me is conscious thinking. That's your conscious. And the subconscious to me is what's on the hard drives, what's kind of deep down in the file folders. And so the conscious thought, what's going on consciously. But when we're working through some of those coaching sessions after we've gotten through a lot of the therapy work, it's still interesting how we'll come across something that happened in a relationship, or we'll come across something that recently happened at work, something that was tolerated by the individual. And the only reason it was tolerated or accepted is because it was normal from the past. Okay? And that's something that's very interesting. And I want you to really process that real quick, because when we think about the stuff that we see today as we're growing up, as we're adults, as we're going through the process, we believe sometimes that these things happen, well, I don't know how this happened, or I don't know how I found myself in this position, or I don't know. But the thing is that we've had a taste of it before. We've had a taste of it before, and the only reason we're in it now is because we had that taste of it before. Okay? And so when I'm talking about these cycles, I'm talking about things that probably happen in your childhood, in your young adulthood, in college, school, what have you. And then as you're, going into, being an adult, going through everything, getting married, that kind of sort of thing, and finding yourself in these same type of cycles. One of the biggest caveats about manipulation is control. To me, manipulation is highly effective when people are using it to try to gain control over somebody else. And so really what they're doing is they're using this manipulation to make the other person feel lesser than, using the manipulation to feel the other person as though that they're in debt to that person and that they need that person. You see what I'm saying? Because if you make somebody believe that without you, they're nothing, okay? If you can get somebody to believe that if you leave, this person equates to nothing, their value goes way down. If you can get somebody to believe that, that's usually used with manipulation, correct? The manipulation of the thought, the manipulation of that person and who they really are and what their value is, manipulating their mind to believe that they aren't worthy enough, that you're the catch of the day. You see what I'm saying? Making them believe that if they are to leave, this bad thing is going to happen. Okay? Or bad things could come about for them. And, a lot of times we hear about, you'll hear in the news or you'll hear probably back in school, when somebody was dating someone and the person was wanting to break up with them and the person knew they were going to break up with them. And instead of having that happen, the person says, well, you know what, if you break up with me, I'm going to do something bad or I'm going to hurt you, or better yet, I'm going to hurt myself. And I think many of us listening to this show, including myself, has been in a situation where somebody has told me that they're going to kill themselves if I leave them. And it can be very scary because you feel really bad and you don't want them to hurt themselves. But in the same account, it can be very painful and you can have a lot of resentment because the relationship's not working, things aren't going the way they should, right? Things aren't going the way that they should be. And in that situation, you're giving in back into that relationship, right? And as you go back into that relationship, because the other person said they were going to do X, Y, Z, you feel manipulated, bamboozled, and then the person uses another line of manipulation to contain you in the relationship. All of that is emotional blackmail, okay? And one of the things that I've realized with that is that when we play along with them, we're allowing them to manipulate us. When we play along with them, we're allowing them to manipulate us. Not cool. Okay? I do not like that. I do not like to be manipulated. I do not like to feel like I'm being manipulated. That is not something that I like to do. And that's not like something that I like to deal with in my life. And so I don't play along anymore. When somebody does that to me, my first is a conscious awareness of what I'm dealing with. Secondly, I really think about the situation and really weigh it, pros and cons. And then third, if I feel as though this person really could hurt themselves in any way, shape, or form, I call the police and let them deal with that. Because one of the things that people don't do, well, occasionally some people do, but most people do not try to manipulate the police because they're not in an emotional, codependent relationship with the cops, right? So you're just like, hey, if you feel that way, and if you say that again, I'm going to have to call the police. Now, I understand there's a little bit of, responsibility to making sure that they are okay, but you're not responsible for the person to stay in the relationship based on whatever blackmail that they're going to use. That's just encouraging this manipulative attitude, encouraging this codependent behavior. and it's actually allowing them to get away with using you in a way, and then them feel like they can continue to do that throughout time. When I return, we're going to talk about more about manipulation. Reggie Harvey is joining me in studio later tonight. I can't wait for that. And he's going to be talking about manipulation and his perspective on manipulation as well, which I find is going to be really cool, coming from his direction, his thought process, where he's been and where he is today. We'll be talking more about the signs of manipulation as well. And if you haven't already, please check out my YouTube channel. Go to YouTube. I got new video content up there every week on relationships, dealing with codependency, understanding cluster B personalities, making your marriage better, overcoming the marriage and the roommate situation, and the list goes on. If you go to YouTube, just put in Ashley, B-E-R-G-E-S, Ashley, B-E-R-G-E-S. You'll find my channel. Please subscribe, and you can watch new video content every week on things that matter to you. Stay tuned. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
I'm learning to fly. Turn it up and jump in the deep end on Perspectives. Now, here's Ashley.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I'm talking about manipulation. Are you being manipulated? Very interesting stuff. Manipulation is interesting because what happens is that often we don't even realize we're being manipulated. We're in a relationship. Maybe we're in a work relationship, a work partnership. Maybe it's a good friend that we've had for a very long time. Maybe it's a love affair that we're having. Maybe it's our spouse. And we're being manipulated. And we're going through this manipulation on a constant basis. And some of us don't even realize, but we do know that we don't feel happy. We feel controlled, we feel overwhelmed, we feel stressed out, we feel bamboozled, and the list goes on. You know, I find this interesting because awareness is key when it comes to manipulation, and so that's why I've been talking about some signs that you're being manipulated, because remember, manipulation is used to control you, okay? And oftentimes, well, the majority, 99.9% of the time when somebody's manipulating you, they're manipulating you because they can't control their own life, but they're going to try to control your life. And they see that if they have control over your life, that makes them feel more in control of their own, even though they're completely out of control. And many of us have dealt with that when we were being raised by our parents. Mother, dad, aunt, uncle, grandma, grandpa, whoever raised us. And it's interesting because it might not have been, could have been one parent, could have been an aunt or uncle, it could have been somebody that was very controlling. And you felt as though you were jumping through hoops to make this person happy. And so in order to make this person happy or to, quote, love you, end quote, you would jump through these hoops to make things happen because that was your deal. It was very conditional love. Okay, very interesting stuff here. Very interesting stuff here. And that's what I find very interesting when we're thinking about manipulation, is that manipulation is based on control. Okay, normally it's based on control. The individual is not aware that they're being manipulated, and the person's too scared to speak up because the other person has said, you know, if you leave me, I will do this. If you do this, I will ruin you. Whatever it is that's being done, the other person's too scared to say anything. You know, one of the other signs that I've seen in an example, particular example actually, is when you're being manipulated, is when somebody tells you or says, hey, if you really did love me, or if you were really my true friend, you would do this for me. Okay. And oftentimes they are huge things that they're asking you to do. It's not a short order. It's a lot. Okay. And it's interesting because I've been in those positions before. Okay? And the interesting part of this is that when you're in this position and somebody asks you to do something big, right? They ask you to do something big for them. Usually, they actually manipulate you to ask you for something so big that very rarely is anybody ever going to agree to that. You know, like, hey, could you drop everything and do XYZ? Or, hey, can you buy me a car? You know, something like that. And so normally most people say no. They say no because they have that intelligence level that this isn't a good deal for them. This isn't going to help them. But what happens is that then the manipulator asks them to do something else that's just a little bit smaller. You see what I'm saying? And so they ask them to do something smaller, a little more bite size, and, the person goes for it, not really thinking of if this is good for me. And what I'm saying about being good for me is it's not like a self-serving thing. I'm just saying, hey, is this where you want to be at in life? Is this good for you? Is this the good direction in your life? Does this make you feel whole? Is this going to help you to really take this to the next level in your life? Is this a positive thing in your life, or is this not a positive thing in your life? All these thoughts need to be considered when dealing with a certain specific situation, because manipulation is huge. It's huge. And often we don't even realize that it's happening to us. And so when we think about this type of control, realize that when somebody is manipulating you, they feel out of control. When somebody's manipulating you, this might be done by a narcissist or someone different. But when you're dealing with narcissism, a lot of times the person is telling you that you're not worthy, you're not good enough, you're lucky, to be with me, you're lucky to have me in your life. If it wasn't for me in your life, you'd be nobody, you'd be nothing. But in reality, when you're dealing with a true narcissist, deep down inside, this person feels vanquished. They feel empty, okay? And the narcissism, I think, is more learned than anything. I think it's more learned than anything when we go through certain situations in our family dynamic. We've talked about genetics when it comes to cluster B personality disorders, and I believe that has some relevance as well. And I also believe that it's a learned response, too, to behavior. Folks become more narcissistic when there's absence of family, or family is narcissistic, and that's the way that they've seen it be. And so there's a cyclical pattern there. And manipulation is definitely a tool that is used to create question in one's mind, to have someone do things that they wouldn't normally do, and even allow someone to put them into a situation that's really not good for them. And that's an interesting scenario as well. One thing that I found too when it comes to relationships, and I hear this more often than not, is somebody will tell me that they moved to a different state, even a different country, to be in a relationship with somebody. They moved to a different state, a different country to be in a relationship with somebody. And that is really wild. That is some amazing stuff, because, when you think about it that way, and you think about somebody moving into another place, moving out of their state, going somewhere else, and, living with somebody and going through this whole process, right? It's very interesting, because what happens is usually if that person is not up and up, if that person is being manipulative, they've gotten them into an unknown place. They don't know anybody there. And they don't have any friends there that they know. They're in new surroundings, and all of which create for a very good place for this person to manipulate them, because they're basically under their thumb. And, folks will say, well, why doesn't that work? Well, it's like, it'll work if you're not dealing with someone that's highly manipulative, because when you're dealing with someone that's highly manipulative, you're dealing with somebody that's based on control. They want to control you. They want to tell you what to do. They want to make sure that you meet only the people they want you to meet. They make sure that they are in control of the conversations, control of the situation, so they know exactly what you're doing, where you are, when you're there, and who you're talking to. I've had clients before they've come into the office, they've messaged me and they've let me know that their significant other, or boyfriend or girlfriend, is tailing them, is following them a few cars behind, and they're following them to find out where they're going. Okay? Obviously, that's a little bit of stalking, but think about it. They're looking to find out where that person is. And, in the manipulation status, what happens is the more and more you're being manipulated, the more and more you've been taken advantage of, the more and more you're being used and controlled, the more apparent it becomes. Okay, the red flags are flying high here. Okay, the red flags are flying high here, But a lot of times, because of our past, because of the way we were raised, it just seems normal. One of the big manipulative tactics that I've seen is that they make sure that you are the one that's at fault. Okay, so when things go wrong or something goes bad or something doesn't go the way that's planned, it wasn't their fault, it was your fault. If it hadn't have been for you, then everything would have been fine, because they're never going to take responsibility for their actions. Do you see what I'm saying? In order to be a non-manipulative, straight-up person, you've got to take responsibility for your actions. You've got to understand that. You've got to take responsibility and step forward and say, hey, it was me that went through it. It was me that caused this. I apologize. But when you're dealing with somebody who is highly manipulative, they are not going to apologize, and they're certainly not going to say that they were at fault. Instead, consciously or unconsciously, they're going to throw blame and throw shade to you because it's easier. Many of you might be thinking about your current relationship right now and begin to think about how your spouse, your girlfriend or boyfriend has never taken responsibility for absolutely anything. Everything is your fault. Maybe your boss is constantly telling you that you're the problem. You're the reason why they didn't get the account. You're the reason why they didn't land this. And it has nothing to do with him or her. Very interesting stuff. When we begin to realize the manipulation quotient, we can begin to defend ourselves properly. Don't miss it. In just a few minutes, Reggie Harvey comes into the studio live to give his perspective on manipulation. And from where he's come and where he is today, that perspective is very interesting because it really gives us a new sense of reality when talking about this to understand manipulation even better. Stay tuned. Live Your True Life Perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back this time. Well, you know it. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
This is Jake Busey, and you're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we've been talking about manipulation. Are you currently being manipulated? More often than not, we're unaware of when we're being manipulated by friends, family, loved ones. You know, especially the closer somebody might be, the more difficult it might to actually understand what's actually truly happening because of the emotional connectivity, even possibility of the codependence involved with the relationship. You know, we don't want to see people in our life being manipulative. We don't want to feel like they're not being honest or truthworthy. We want to believe that everybody is telling us the truth, they care about us, they love us, and they're doing what's right for us. You know, manipulation is an interesting thing, though. Until we begin to recognize it and realize it, we might not even know it exists. I found that in some relationships a long time ago, years ago, but still present, I remember not realizing the factor of manipulation. And when I finally began to realize it and uncover it, I realized why I felt certain ways around certain people. Why I felt a little bit of resentment sometimes when I was doing things for other people. Because what it really was happening is that it wasn't really what was right for me. And I consciously didn't realize that, but subconsciously I did. And so in this show, we've been talking about the signs and symptoms of manipulation. And joining me live in studio, Reggie Harvey. Reggie is the author of Anatomy of a Patient. It's an amazing book that you can buy on Amazon, and it's helping people all over the country. He's a survivor of a near-death diagnosis, and he's a great friend. And his perspective is truly unique, and I like the way that he looks at things. So I'm interested to see how he's going to have his take on dealing with manipulation, understanding it, but better yet, being able to understand ourselves to not get taken in by it and fall prey to it. Great to have you in studio, Reggie. How you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. I want to talk a little bit about this topic with respect to something that my dad used to tell me, to look out for human nature in people. And part of that human nature thing, I think, is connected to a previous conversation that we've had having to do with knowing your values, because that's key to knowing who you are. And it doesn't mean that everybody else in the world has to adopt your value system or adapt to your values, but you have to understand what they are. And when you know who you are, it's easier to see when someone, especially someone who doesn't know you that well, but is trying to figure out what buttons to push to get you to do something they want you to do. Knowing who you are helps you to defend against that. And you don't have to be ugly about it. It's just like, no, I'm not going there, not doing that. That's not me. And you embrace your personal integrity at that point. So that's all wrapped up in the idea of knowing your true values. So I'm very grateful to you for having brought that up to our listeners before. In my past, when I was early in my career, I was known for being able to complete tasks that other people struggled with. And it was just because I was insatiably curious about how things worked and why they worked. And I was good at talking people into contributing their best talents to solve problems that had never been solved before. I just really got excited about that. And I had this one project. I was in my 30s that was very successful. I was still working in Department of Defense contracting work. And we had a technical interchange review meeting, and one of the guys that was going to be chairing the meeting I thought was in my corner and was happy with the work that I had done. Got in the meeting, and halfway through, he convinced everybody that I was a blithering idiot and I was way above my head, and to rescue me, he was going to take the project over, and everybody agreed. Within an hour of that meeting, which I was still very bewildered with what had transpired, I get a call from this guy, and he asks me if I can give him all of my contacts that I've leveraged to get this project going. And I told him, I said, well, you know, Bob, within the last hour, we just all agreed that I was an idiot, and I want you to be successful, and I really don't think that I would put you at risk by giving you any of the resources that I use, because obviously I'm an idiot, and those wouldn't help you at all. People quickly learn that you leave stuff alone that I owned, because if you decided to take it from me, you owned it. But that was the first time that I actually experienced someone coveting something that I had worked hard to do. It happened again some years later, probably 20 years later. I was at a national conference for a professional certification body, and talking with the president of that organization. And I had become aware that one of his key employees was planning a coup to take over his business. And I thought, out of courtesy, I would let him know to look out for this situation. Well, he did not receive the information very well. And I was also trying to negotiate a new contract with him. And the very guy that was planning the coup pulled me aside, cursed me out, told me that if I wanted the contract, I needed to apologize and give him cover with his boss, and da-da-da-da-da, and I refused to do that and left the meeting. Another few years later, he reached out to me on LinkedIn and wanted to connect, and I was shocked. And I responded and I said, given the names you called me and the things that you said to me the last time we were together, I'm appalled that you would even have the balls to contact me and ask me to connect with you on this professional forum. And to my shock, this gentleman just simply said, well, Reggie, I just don't really know what you're talking about. I don't remember that we had any conflict. By the way, that same guy did pull the coup and took half the personnel from the head of that professional certification agency. But that's all water under the dam. Anyway, that plays back into what my father had told me about human nature. People do things out of greed or out of envy or just coveting what you have, even if they never thought about it before you had it. It's just a part of who the greater public seems to be. I don't get it, but I acknowledge that it happens. So the way I was able to respond to those two attacks, if you will, is that I remembered who I was. I was able to protect my personal integrity. I was able to thwart efforts to manipulate me into either retracting something that I wholeheartedly believed in, or to recognize that people were trying to benefit and profit from my hard work, and then come back to me as if nothing had happened and ask for my assistance. And I decided early on I just couldn't do that. My personal integrity was more important to me than maintaining a faux friendship or political position. So I accepted the logical outcomes of that. It was always going to be a little bit more difficult for me because I was going to be bluntly honest with people. I just didn't want to play that game. And I'm not blaming people for doing it. I'm just saying it will happen. And it will happen with people that you've known for years. So you can't guard against it. It has nothing to do, it's not a cause and effect thing. It's just all of a sudden out of the clear blue, somebody decides they're going to force you to do something for them or give them something that they don't deserve, or just take control of a situation that they're really not prepared to manage. And you have a choice to allow it to happen or not. So this is a mantra that I now live by, and it's part of the reason that I wrote Anatomy of a Patient, was to let people know that, especially in the face of tragedy, when you're off your game, you still have to hang on to who you are. And if you know who you are, you'll be able to come out on the other side. And it doesn't have to be a pretty journey. You just have to complete the journey. You can get my book on Amazon.com, or you can go to my website, reggieharvey.net, ReggieHarvey.net, and learn a little bit more about me, find out where you can purchase the book. And you can also listen to some past podcasts of our conversations. And I really appreciate being able to participate in this forum with you, Ashley. I think the service that you are providing is essential, because these are conversations that people are afraid to have or just don't know they need to have. We assume that just running on automatic is good enough, and we find out when we mature out of that mode of operation that life can be so much richer and our relationships can be so much more rewarding. Thank you for having me. I look forward to coming back.
Great perspective. You know, manipulation can happen in any type of relationship by anyone. And, you know, until we really realize and understand the impact of that, we can't really change it. We can't be there as the guardian of our galaxy, the guardian to our life. We need to have that, though, to create reality, to create a good, truthful structure in our life. When I return, I'm going to be talking more about manipulations and things that you can do to end the manipulation cycle, begin to end it right now. Live Your True Life Perspectives. We'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
You could be my luck. Get in here. You're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we've been talking about manipulation, signs of manipulation, and I'm also going to be offering some solutions on what you can do to offset this and end the cycle. You know, most of the time when we deal with manipulation, we deal with it, we don't even suspect it, and it goes underneath the radar because we've dealt with it before and past, whether that was when we were being raised, that was through our childhood, whatever that looked like, we've dealt with it. And it was such a reality for us for so long, but we didn't realize that it was unhealthy. We just knew that it was part of our day-to-day life. You know, and a good example, too, of being manipulated is when someone keeps telling you that you take things too seriously, or you don't understand a joke, or, you know, you're too sensitive. And I always find that very interesting. And haven't you been on the side of that receiving end where somebody tells you that, and like whatever they had told you kind of hurt your feelings? Whatever they had told you kind of hurt and stung and didn't feel very good. And you're over there thinking in your head, And then the next thing you know, you might actually stand up for yourself or make a comment, and their response is, oh, there you are, too sensitive again, can't take a joke. And I always find that's a way of controlling as well. So when somebody's manipulating you to feel bad, to have a lower self-esteem, to feel bad about yourself, and then you stand up for yourself, they knock you back down with that whack-a-mole, right? Remember that horrible game, the whack-a-mole at the Chuck E. Cheese or whatever when you were a kid? I mean, you felt bad. I mean, it was like, gosh, I know it's a fake thing, but really not cool. But you do feel like you're getting knocked down like the whack-a-mole again when you try to stand up for yourself, and then they beat you down saying, I was just kidding. You can't take a joke. You're so overly sensitive. You know, what are you, a little girl? You know what I'm saying? I mean, all these things are all signs that you are being manipulated. You are being manipulated. I did a video on YouTube a while back on gaslighting, and that's definitely a form of manipulation as well. You know, making someone almost feel like they're going insane, like, you know, oh, you know, basically, you know, you're doing the right thing, but they make you feel as though you're not, or you missed this, or you didn't get this, or what, even small things like just on timing, you know. Well, it was at this time. No, it was at this time. You can't even get a time right. I mean, what's going on in your head when they're gaslighting you to begin to feel as though you're going crazy? And that's a sign of manipulation as well. And, you know, I hate to say it, but there are some folks out there that will go to any length to be controlling of you, to have that upper hand, to be in control, and they'll use these tactics. Some of them, I believe, are consciously using these tactics. Some of these are unconsciously using these tactics. Some of them, it's a combination of both. But it goes back to making them they want to feel better about themselves. They want to feel better about themselves, and that means that it's okay at putting you down, right? Because that helps them to feel better about themselves. They also will go to all ends to have the control. Okay, and so control is a big factor. If you really think about manipulation is to control the way you think, to control the way you feel, to control what you do, or control who you are, or to control what you say. Okay? Every form of manipulation is based on controlling one of those aspects or multiple aspects of you. So some of the solutions that you can look toward to get some balance in your life is, one of the first things is that from a therapist and a life coach, you know, perspective, that's me, you really want to go see a therapist because things aren't going to change overnight, okay? But it's good to be able to voice what's happening, to talk it out so that you have understanding and direction in the direction of where you want to go, and to also understand what part of this is manipulation, what part of this is you that you're dealing with, and to really flesh out that information so you can understand yourself better and understand the situation you're in better. You know, another solution, and also, by the way, before I go into the second solution, I see clients all over the globe. I do not have a client in Antarctica at this time, and there's a few other places, but I do see clients all over the world via Skype or FaceTime, and it's excellent. And it's like you're here in my office with me. You know, I'm in the studio right now, but it's like you're here in my office with me when I'm in the office, and it's just like a regular session. I do phone consults as well. A lot of people would rather talk to me on the phone and not have to make as much eye contact. And then I also see clients in my office in my home base in Dallas. You know, another solution is realizing your value. Okay, realizing your value. Until we realize our value, we don't realize that we're being manipulated. Okay, because when we don't realize that we have value, it's easy to manipulate us. Because when we don't realize we have value, we're playing right into the hand of the manipulator. We're playing right into the hand of the manipulator on all costs. You see what I'm saying? Because they're telling us that we're not worthy. They're telling us that we need to get our act straight. They're telling us that we're overly emotional. They're telling us that we're, you know, all these things. And so if we don't realize our own value and what we bring to the table, well, then we're not going to actually understand that we're going to be manipulated. And we're also not understanding what's really happening in that manipulation, i.e. it's taking away from our self-esteem, our self-worth, and it's rotting our life from the inside out. Also, I just did a video on manipulation on YouTube, signs of being manipulated. You might want to watch that as well. So if you go to YouTube, Google YouTube and put in Ashley Burgess, Ashley Burgess, Berges, and you can watch the latest video on manipulation, how to uncover what's happening in your life, the elephant in the room. I love elephants. I don't know why they always use the elephant as the example, because elephants are awesome and loving animals. They are not manipulative creatures. Last but not least is that, if it's a specific relationship you're dealing with in your life, you really need to begin to examine that relationship, and you need to use some techniques, and you need to work with a therapist to understand how to work through this and see if you can safeguard or salvage the relationship. And in some of these relationships, you might not be able to for your own worth and self-esteem, and you'll begin to see how glaringly obvious that is quickly before, you'll actually see it very quickly when you're working with somebody, and you'll understand the appropriate way and the appropriate action to take. Because when we have somebody that's manipulating us, taking advantage of us, claiming one thing or another, getting in the way of our value, that stuff is full-on manipulation and should not be tolerated, because that will interrupt your self-esteem and your purpose and your calling in life, and you have a reason to be here. And if you're being manipulated more time than not, that's getting in the way of you creating the foundation for that purpose and giving back to the world the gifts that you have. I hope this show has helped you. Please share with your family and friends, and live your true life perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back this time in 3 shakes.